Beruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Kuf Mem Hey Omid Beis, the last line on the Amud. The Gemara previously had told us Rabbi Chia bar Abba and Rabbi Asi were sitting before the Rebbe, Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan was dozing off. Rabbi Chia bar Abba proceeded to ask several questions to Rabbi Asi. The final question was as follows: Mibnei ma oivdei kochavim mizuhamin. Why are the Ovdei Kacham Mizuhamin? Here refers to a spiritual impediment. Why do they have a spiritual impurity? Answers Rabbi Yochanan after he woke up, Shaloi Amdu al Har Sinai. Unlike that which Rabbi Asi responded because they eat shkotzim and remosim, Rabbi Yochanan tells us that the reason is because they didn't stand at Har Sinai. Because when the Nachash persuaded Chava to eat from the Eitz Hadas, he injected in her Zuhama. We're on the top of Kuf Mem Vav and Aleph. And therefore, explains Rabbi Yochanan, Yisrael she'amdu al Har Sinai Posca Zuhamasan. Oivdei Kacham she'lo amdu al Har Sinai lo Posca Zuhamasan. The Klal Yisrael who are at Har Sinai, their zuhama, that impurity that was injected by the Nachash, then was removed and left them. But those who did not stand at Har Sinai still have the zuhama. Ask the Gemara, Amalei Rav Acha Berei Rav Rav Ashi, Geirim Mai. What about Geirim? They did not stand at Har Sinai. Do they still have zuhama? Answers the Gemara, Amarlei Afagav the Inhu Lo Havu Mazlayu Havu. Even though they themselves were not there, but their mazel was there. That means when it comes to Klal Yisrael, even if those who were not living at the time and their goof was not at Har Sinai, their neshamas were still there. But Goyim, who did not have a Yiddish neshama, so the Gemara tells us that their mazel was there. As it says in the Pasuk, Desiv Es Asher Yeshno Po imonu oimed hayoim lifnei Hashem Elokeinu ves asher einenu poi. Explains the Gemara, Upliga de Rabbi Abba bar Kahana. This explanation of Rabbi Yochanan that says Posca Zuhumasan when they came to Har Sinai, that is in contrast and argues with Rabbi Abba bar Kahana. The Omer Rabbi Abba bar Kahana al shloisha doros loy Posca Zuhumasa me'avoseinu. There were 3 generations until the Zuhama left our forefathers. Avram hoylid es Yishmael. Avram had Yishmael, and therefore the impurity went to Yishmael. Yitzchak hoylid es Esav. Yitzchak had the impurity, went to Esav. Yaakov hoylid yud beis shvatim shelo haya bahen shum doifi. And therefore Pasku Zumasam after 3 generations. So unlike that which Rabbi Yochanan explained, that the Zuhama was in Klal Yisrael all the way until Har Sinai, that clearly is in contrast, in distinction, and in argument with Rabbi Abba bar Kahana that says it was Posca many generations before, really at the time of Yaakov Avinu. The Mishnah says as follows: Shoiver Adam es achavis leechol heimena groigerus. A person can break a chavis in order to then get the dried figs that are inside. In other words, by breaking the chavis, it's a kilkul, and mekalkil for a tzorech Shabbos is mutter. Ubilvad shelo yiskaven la'asos kli, on condition, providing that he is not going to then make a kli when breaking that chavis. If he does intend, however, to make a kli when he breaks the chavis, then obviously that's a tikkun of the kli, and that will be Osir. The Mishnah goes on to say, "Ve'ein noikvin migufa shel chavis di Rabbi Yehuda ve'chacham matirim." Here it states that you cannot make a hole in the top, the migufa shel chavis. There was a clay top that they would close the chavis with, and they would seal it, which is called a migufa shel chavis. So Rabbi Yehuda says you cannot make a hole on that migufa shel chavis, whereas the chacham said you can. V'lo yikvena b'tzida. However, the chacham say you cannot make a hole on its side. The Mishnah goes on to say, V'im haisa nekuva, if it had a hole, Lo yitin aleh shayva b'mnei shehu mimareach. You cannot put wax and close up the hole, because that will be an isser of mimareach, an isser of mimareach, which is memachek on Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda Maise ba lifnei Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai ba'erev. There was a Maise that took place where Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai resided, a place called Orev. Va'omar, and he said, Choshashani loy mechatos. He wasn't sure if the person then took wax and sealed the hole of the chavis with wax or not. And therefore, he was choishesh that maybe if he indeed did seal it and rub the wax, closing the hole, he would be chayiv a korban chatos. Says the Gemara, qualifying what our Mishnah stated. When our Mishnah says a person can break a chavis to eat groigeris, explains the Gemara. Omar of Oshaya lo shanu ela drusois ava mifurodos loy. We're talking about where we have dried figs that were pressed into cakes and were stored in the chavis. That's when a person can take a knife and break open the chavis. Ava mifurodos loy. But if they were figs, dried figs that were separated, then he cannot do so. He cannot take an implement like a knife and break open the chavis. Ask the Gemara, Mefurados loy, the case if the figs were dried and separated from another, one cannot break open that chavis. Meisve asked the Gemara, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Oimer, maybe Adam es hachavis shel yayin umeitiz roisha b'sayif. If a person has a chavis filled with wine, he can go ahead and take a sayif, a sword, a large knife, and break it open in order to then get the contents, the yayin, from the chavis. So here we clearly have a situation where the yayin is not something that's stuck together. It's like mefurados, and still you can go ahead and break it open. Answers the Gemara, Hahi mirabanan. That is the Rabbanon that said you can go ahead and break open a chavis shel yayin with a sayif. Masnisin Rabbi Nechemihi. But our Mishnah, however, is authored by Rabbi Nechemiah. Rabbi Nechemiah, as we encountered more than once in this Masechta, has a special sheet in regards to muktzah. He says you can only metaltel, you can only then move a kli for its designated purpose. So if it's a kli shel malachta leheter, like a knife, you can only move the knife to use it to cut something with. But in this case, to break open a chavis, that you could not move the knife. And therefore, only if it's going to be dried figs that are fig cakes, where you'd have to then cut the figs apart, can you go ahead and take the knife and move it. Once you're already taking a knife to move it, to cut the figs, you can also then break the chavis open. Ask the Gemara, "Omai doichke de Rabbi Oshaya luukmi masnisin Rabbi Nechemiah uvedrusois." Why is it that Rav Oshaya made it so that the Mishnah has to be according to Rabbi Nechemiah? And therefore, it's talking about a case where it's figs that are clamped together into fig cakes. Why not learn that it's the Rabbanan? Look me befrodos, the Rabbanan. Explain that the Mishnah is talking about figs that are separated, and then even according to the Rabbanan, you can go ahead and open that chavis up with a knife or a sword. Omar Rav explains, Masnisin kashise, because Rav Oshaya had the Mishnah as a difficulty. My area, the Tani groigeris, lisni peiros. Why does the Mishnah go out of its way to make a case of groigeris, of dried figs, and the typical way that used to have dried figs was to make it into cakes? Therefore, he understood that we're talking about specifically that situation. Elishmamine b'droises. Rather, it must be that we're talking about dried figs that are into cakes that are smushed, that were squeezed into clumped together, and therefore we must be talking about Rabbi Nechemiah's situation where you then can bring a knife there. But if it was indeed dried figs that were separated, then one could not go ahead and open the chavis. Says the Gemara weiter, Tanya Chada, one Brisa states, Choisolois shel groigerois shel tamarim matir umafkia v'choitech. Choitolois are baskets that they would normally put figs that were unripened, and they would put them inside of these baskets. They would close the basket up with a cover and let it sit there till they become ripened. So these chaysalos, either of figs or of dates, you can be matir. You can go ahead and untie the rope, which was tied in a way that was mutter to tie on Shabbos. Therefore, it's mutter to then untie it because it's a knot that is very, very temporary. And you can also go ahead and mafkia. You can unravel that rope. And you can also, if you needed to, take an implement and cut the rope. V'tani idach, another brisa states, matir, you can go ahead and untie the knot of the rope with your hand. Avaloi mafkia, avaloi choitech, but you cannot unravel it, and you cannot go ahead and cut it. Answers the Gemara, lo kasha, it's not a contradiction. Ha rabbanon ha Rabbi Nechemya. The first brisa that states you can not only be matir, but you can be mafkia, and you can be choitech. That's the rabbanon, that you can take the implement, and you can even use the implement to go ahead and unravel the rope, for example. Whereas the other brisa that states that it is also the second brisa to be mafkia or to be choitech, that is Rabbi Nechemya. The Tanya, for it states, Rabbi Nechemya oimer. This is the sheet of Rabbi Nechemya as we see in the brisa. Afilu tarvad v'afilu talis v'afilu sakin einotin el letzor tashmishin. If you have a beged or a knife, things that are klisha malachta leheter, one can move normally these things on Shabbos, but Rabbi Nechemya says only for their intended usage. And therefore, if you're not using the knife specifically to cut, you can't use it to do something else. For example, you could not use it to unravel a rope. And therefore, that brisa that states you cannot be mafki is referring to Rabbi Nechemya. Says the Gemara Vayter, asking the following question, boy, my name Rav Sheshes. They asked Rav Sheshes, Mahu, lemivraz chavisa beburtiya b'shabto. Can a person pierce a chavis with a roimach, with a sharp knife on Shabbos? Lepischa kimechavin v'osir. Is it making a pesach, and therefore it's a tikkun of the kli, would be osir? Or dilma la'ayin yofa kimechavin v'shoy. Or perhaps we're saying that he's just doing so in order to then bring out more wine for the guests, showing his generosity. Omarle. So Rav Shesh's answer, lepischa kamechavin v'osir. He's making a pesach whereby it's a tikkun of the kli and it's osir. Meisvei frek the Gemara. Rabbi Shem Gamliel Oimer, it states, by Rabbi Shem Gamliel, Mevi Adam Chavi Shel Yayin Umeitiz Rosha B'Sayif. A person can bring a Chavi Shel Yayin and you can lop off the head with a sword. Answers the Gemara, no Hasam Vade La'ayin Yofa Kimechavin. There, he's making a wider type of hole or opening by lopping off the head, beneath the head of the covering, the Megufas HaChavis. So therefore, it's clearly he's doing for ayin yofa, generosity. But hocha im isa de la ayin yofa kimechavin leptuche miftach. But here, if indeed he was doing it for generosity, for an ayin yofa, for his guests, then he should have taken off the top, not just make a piercing of a hole inside the side, which is a much smaller hole to allow the wine to come out with. So here, clearly, Rav Sheshes is saying this would be also, it would be a tikkun of the kli by making a hole on the side. The Gemara now quotes the Mishnah, a noikvin migufa. The Mishnah states that according to the Tanakama, which is Rabbi Yehuda, you can't make a hole in the migufa shel chavis. The Rabbanan said it's mutter to make a hole in migufa shel chavis, and added v'lo yikvena b'tzida. However, you cannot make a hole on the side. Explains the Gemara, Rav Huna, Machloikis lamalo avol min hatzad divrei hakol oser. The machloikis in Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim is making a hole on top of the megufas chavis. However, if you would make it on the side of the megufas chavis, then even the Chachamim would agree that would be oser. The hainu diktoni, and that's what it's teaching when it says lo yikvena b'tzida. You cannot make a hole on the side. So the Chachamim seem to clearly indicate that although you could make a hole on top, because that's not a normal place to make a hole, on the top of the Megufas HaChavis, but you could not make it on the side of the Megufas HaChavis because that would be something that a person would do as a tikkun to the Kli. Rav Chisda argues, and he says, no, the machlokes is different. Machlokes minat tzad. They are arguing the Chomim with Rabbi Yehuda about making a hole on the side of the megufas chavis. Rabbi Yehuda says it's osir. Rabbi Chacham say that's mutter. Aval al gaba divrei hakol mutter. But on top, everybody agrees that is mutter. V'hodektoni lo yikvena mitzida. And that's what it teaches, lo yikvena, you cannot make a hole on the side. Hasam, what does it mean? Begufa de chavis. That which it states that you cannot make a hole on the side is talking about on the chavis itself. But in regards to the machlokes, it's mihatzad of the megufa chavis. Aval agabe divrei hakol, on top of the megufa chavis is going to be mutter according to everybody, and on the side of the chavis itself, that's for sure going to be then osir. That's what it means that it's also on the side. In other words, Rav Chisda is saying the machloches minatzad is referring to the side of the chavis, but the top of the chavis where the megufa is, that is where that is where everybody's going to say is mutter. So once again, that according to Rav Chisda, Rabbi Yehuda says if you make a hole on the side of the chavis, he says that's going to be mutter, whereas the Chachamim say it's osir. On top of the chavis, where the megufa chavis is, that everybody says is going to be mutter. Gemara now brings the following brayse: Tanu Rabbanon ein noikvin nekev chodosh b'Shabbos. You cannot make a new hole on Shabbos. V'im ba lo hoisif moisif. But if you're going to then add to the hole, then it is mutter. V'yesh oimim ein moisifin. But if you're going to then add to the hole, then it's, according to Yesh Oimim, it's going to be osir. So there's a machlokes whether you can be moisif or not. The Shavin, the Brisa goes on to say, Shenoikvin nekev yashin lechatchila. But they both agree that you could, yes, make a old hole. That means a hole that was already made, but was closed up. So then when you are then making the hole, it was already really there, you're just removing the covering. V'tanakama maishna, asked the Gemara, nekev chodesh deloi, the kamesakim pischa. Asoife nami kamesakim pischa. The same way that the Tanakama says you cannot make a hole because of tikkun to the kli, by making a pesach in the kli. So when you're marchiv the hole, then that should also be a tikkun to the kli. So why is that not also? Omar Rabbi said, Davar Torah kol pesach she'eno asui lehachnis lehoitzi ein pesach. A pesach midiaraisa that's chayiv, which is considered to be a true pesach, requires that it's machnis umoitzi, that it brings in and it takes out. That's the pesach that is also midiaraisa. V'Rabbanan hu degazer mishum lu shel tanagolim. Whereas the Rabbanan said if you make a pesach that only has one direction, either it's machnis or it's moitzi, then that's going to be also because of a gezerah that a person might make a hole on a lul shel tanagolim, a chicken coop. The ovi li'iyuli avirula puke havola, because the chicken coop is such that they made holes so that the hevel that is inside the chicken coop, that is able to then be let out, and there's new fresh air that's able to come in. V'im bo lo hoisif moisif, and therefore, if you would come to add, you can go ahead and add, it would be mutter, because why? Because when it comes to a lul shel tarnagum, you'll never come to then add and make the hole bigger. Why? It says the Gemara on Daf Kuf Mem Vavam Beis at the top, Mishum Richsha, because of rodents. You would not want rodents to enter through these holes and then damage and kill the roosters, the hens, the chickens, and therefore there's not such a concern of making being moisif on a pre-existing hole, because there's not such a chashash that a person would then add a hole when it comes to a chicken coop. The next opinion says, however, no, v'yesh ein mosifin. There's an opinion that says you cannot add to a pre-existing hole. We just said that if indeed the whole gzeira is because of a chicken coop, so then what's the concern? A person will never add a hole on a chicken coop because of rodents. Explains the Gemara, because maybe he didn't make a proper hole to begin with, and therefore he'll come to add it. He made too small of a hole, whereby he'll then make a bigger hole. And thereby, it does have such a concern of a gezerah because of the lul shel tarnagolim. Dorash Rav Nachman Mishur Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Nachman made a drasha. He then expounded the halacha in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and he paskin halacha ki yesh oimim. The halacha is like indeed the yesh oimim, that is also to be moisif, a pre-existing hole.